Thank you for joining FNBO's Business Insights webinar series. We're delighted that you've joined us. This webinar is exclusively focused for business owners, just like you, thinking, pondering about a transition. At FNBO, we've had a front row seat to business owners who have transferred well and those who have transferred somewhat less prepared. So we have a dedicated group, Business Owner Advisory Services, that's focused on this exact situation. And so our goal is to prepare business owners for their eventual transition on your terms to realize the work that you've built in establishing your company. So today is about getting started. We're going to go through our exit planning process. And as we use the word exit, I hope you'll bear with us a little bit. That word might mean retirement to you, or it might mean generational succession, or slowly, incrementally slowing down. Whatever it is, we've tried to use one word and we've chose the word exit. We're going to talk about the 3 decisions that you can make, which will establish momentum and how to get started. And then we've got some action items very specifically for you to get started. Before we go ahead here, I'd like to briefly introduce Chris Carnes from our Omaha office, Laura Troshinsky from North Platte, and then again, by way of introduction, Josh Huseman, and I'm in our Illinois office. We're in 8 states across FNBO's enterprise, and this team is equipped to support the company, support our customers fully. We're resourced with online tools such as Zoom and assessments and good old-fashioned in-person meetings as well. And so this is the team of our Business Owner Advisory Group. I'd like to begin with a setting. A business owner who is pondering, approaching a transition. And we've had customers ask us these specific questions that are on the screen here. They've told us that this is a complex process. They're not exactly sure who they need to turn to. How am I going to spend my time after the business? Will I do it all at once or slowly over time? What about my employees? Are they ready to take the company forward? What will happen if there's a new owner in place? Are there some tax planning moves that I should be doing now? Maybe that I should have already done. And how much is this going to mean to me by the time taxes are paid? And finally, on control. Will I have to remain employed as an employee for a period of time, no longer an owner? Should we keep this in the family? We know that running a business requires a lot of day-to-day decisions. Sometimes planning for your future, it could get pushed to the side. It's called procrastination, and that's okay. We all procrastinate as humans. Maybe there's regret in not starting sooner, or there's excitement, or a wide range of emotions in between. We know that this can be an emotional process, and that's all right as well. But in order to get started, we've designed what we call the prepared exit approach. This is a repeatable process meant to bring guardrails to all the possibilities in planning for your exit. Today, we're going to focus on only step 1. We don't have enough time to get to this. This will be addressed another time, but we want to begin with the end in mind. And for us, we think that our business owners can establish a lot of clarity in identifying when, who, and how much. There are many decisions that need to be made from here. But with this very specific set of questions determined, we believe that you can create momentum in your own prepared exit. We have a very specific process about this, a discovery process, to help draw out, establish, and identify the answers to these questions. We have an assessment tool. We use our interviews. We're going to be proactive, someone that's in your corner to get started. And these 3 questions They might seem simple. We know that there is a lot to consider. We believe that answering these three questions, when, who, and how much, can provide a lot of certainty to get started on what your own plan will look like. And so now I'd like to introduce Laura Troshinsky to talk about when. Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Josh. And as Josh mentioned, there are three very important questions when talking about a transition. And all those questions are incredibly pivotal. However, the when question really helps lay the framework for the remainder of the planning process. And so it's extremely important to remember when answering the question of when a transition should take place, that this is both a technical and an emotional question to answer, and that there are many timelines that need to be considered. So the first timeline that you really need to consider is the timeline of you, the seller. And this really means, one, is it a good time for you to transition your business? But also, are you prepared for that transition? Have you thought about what might happen after you transition? Have you thought about what you will do with your extra time? And are you really ready to make that change? The other timeline that's important to consider is that of the buyer. And this could be a third-party purchaser who says they want to buy a business on X date. It could also be a family member or a key employee who says they want to buy the business, but they may need some time to figure out how they can do that, how they can afford to do that, and if they're really ready. It's also important to consider the spouse and the family when looking at a timeline for a transition. I think we probably all know the people that have maybe worked 60 to 70 hours a week for the last 50 years. It's a big adjustment for a family to all of a sudden have that change, and so it's really important to make sure the family's on the same page in that area. The business is also very important to consider. First of all, is it a good time to sell a business of that nature? And if not, would it make sense to look at timing a little bit differently? Also, it's important to consider whether the business itself has its internal structures in place that would make it a great time to transition. So have all the financials been updated? Have all the internal factors that need to be addressed been addressed to make the business marketable? Finally, is your management team ready for a transition? And what this really means is, do you feel like your management team would be able to assist a new owner if necessary? And do they have the skills that they need from a business standpoint for the transition to take place? It's also really important to consider the financial aspect when considering the when question. And so that includes making sure that we've got a financial analysis done, that you've really thought about your financial plan timeline, and that you've made sure that while you may want to exit the business, it's also something that you can afford to do financially. And so we can really help you flesh out the answer to this question by looking at some readiness indicators for your management team, for you, and from a financial standpoint to make sure as you're thinking about the transition timeline that it really is the best time to start looking at making a transition. Now I think Josh will talk to us a little bit more about the who question.
Thank you, Laura. So to get started on who, this is a survey that was done in 2019, right before COVID started, from the Business Enterprise Institute. They asked business owners what they desired their expected exit path to be. Wherever you might fit, you might find some comfort in these survey data. A third party, almost half of the responses there, quickly by child, family member, or management or employees. And what's important to know is the answer to the who question is, in a lot of cases, whoever you think is best. And we want you to know that you have options. And on this slide here on our color wheel that we call it, we'd like you to see that there are external buyers and internal buyers. And again, bear with us as we think about the word buyers. We know that in some cases it might be family member, it might be generational transfer, but you may have more options than what you think. And so if you look at the right-hand side, if your desired successor owner is internal, you see things like family or employees with ESOPs. In general, internal buyers, they're going to need more time, perhaps need financing from a bank or outside capital resources, but they can solve for culture, experience, and fit. On the left-hand side, when you look at external buyers, you see things like strategic buyers, a competitor, or private equity. External buyers have a very specific source of capital. Sometimes you can get a higher value from an external buyer. They can generally complete a transaction faster. But they can also be very experienced in deal making, which can be tricky, and you might need an intermediary to help with that. But when you think about the answer to your who, the options you may want to consider are your timeline, of which Laura's talked about. Chris will soon talk about how much, which is amount. But these other factors, such as culture and their size and experience, are some other considerations that may be in mind for you. Most importantly, we want you to know that when you've established the answer to when, then you can look at the options that are available that match that timeline. Next, I'll introduce Chris Carnes, who's going to talk about the question, how much?
Thanks, Josh. So we've talked about when and to whom, and the third objective that we're trying to establish is how much. And so we want you to think about what you need when you exit and what you currently have and how you arrived at those amounts. So when we talk about setting your goals around the question of how much, we challenge you to think through what your individual priorities are and how that relates to the amount that you want or that you need to obtain from your exit. For example, your goals might be obtaining the highest multiple when you sell your company. It may be obtaining a high valuation for your company. It may be based on your personal spending needs and what you will need when you retire or exit the business. It may be based on obtaining the most tax-efficient strategy and minimizing your taxes. Or you could have other considerations as well, charitable giving or family succession being just a few of those. It's important to remember that these priorities are unique to you and that you will have to determine what works best for you and your family. But ultimately, what we're trying to solve for when answering the question of how much is to try to focus your attention on what you need when you exit and what you have today. So this helps us ascertain if there are any gaps that we need to focus on closing throughout our process. I'll turn it back to Josh.
Thank you, Chris. So when we think about business insights, we want you to walk away with a specific insight. And our hope is that you can see that beginning to answer 3 questions, that the exit planning process isn't as complicated, isn't as intimidating as what it might seem. So how to get started? These are the 3 questions that we think provide considerable clarity. These are things that we can't answer and only you can. We like to say that we co-create your exit plan together because there are some very specific resources that we have at FNBO that can help. We have a special assessment tool that can provide an understanding of what your priorities are. Because when you have those 3 questions answered, then we can begin to dig a little deeper to see how we can get started. And this assessment tool helps us in that way. You've heard from the Business Owner Advisory Team today. We are a dedicated group focused on our business owners and their transitions. This is not tied to a specific product or service. As we are here today, we're here to provide some insight. And you can have somebody who is going to be in your corner helping with progress. We also have a network of professionals in the M&A markets, in tax planning, business brokers, investment bankers, those of which perhaps you haven't had to reach out to before. We have a network of professionals. Then we also have a valuation estimating tool. That's just another word for saying, let's not guess on the value of your company. Let's begin to understand how much you might be able to get, and you can move along in your process. And so this is something that we co-create. It's also important that you know that we appreciate you may have outside advisors that you work with, CPAs, accountants, and it's our job, we see it, to integrate those various perspectives. Each person brings a unique skill set and expertise, but we all want to be supporting you as the business owner. And so we work with outside advisors to help with your exit plan. I would like to briefly share a summary of our exit plan assessment. This is a sample customer who completed our assessment tool. After they began to answer the questions, when, who, and how much, we then started with their next priorities. This is someone who you can see was very concerned about the market conditions. Is this an appropriate time to sell my company? They also had a very low basis in their stock, and they were concerned about the tax implications of that. They did not really know the value of their company, and there were some other exit objectives that they had as well. So what this helped us do is to take the world of all the possibilities of the exit planning process and to orient ourselves towards these very specific priorities. And then we can detail recommendations from there. We can build out scenarios. We can really focus and make incremental progress on their exit plan. So this is just one example of how we get started with that process. And Chris has a little bit more details now on our exit plan approach.
Thanks, Josh. So we've talked again today mostly about what's in this first column and setting those objectives of when and to whom and for how much. But I want to just speak briefly about our overarching process and how we will take that information to guide you through to a prepared exit. From a macro perspective, we have guide, navigate, and advocate. And I just will talk to you very briefly about what those three terms mean to us. Guide means we know the decisions that you will have to make, and we proactively guide you through those decisions during your transition so that you are better prepared to exit your business. We help navigate you through the process by working with your team of advisors, as Josh mentioned, and making sure that they are held accountable to keep things moving forward and that we continue to navigate you through those difficult decisions that you will have to make. If you don't have trusted advisors, we can recommend folks for you to choose from and to help you create the team that you need to help you with this process. We advocate for you by understanding that this can be a difficult and often emotional process, and we give you permission to experience all of that, but we are pleasantly persistent to keep you moving forward and to keep your team moving forward and held accountable so that we aren't stagnating in this process and we do continue to move forward. From a micro perspective, again, we've talked about that first column, defining the goals and values, and really this helps identify the early priorities and set parameters around the process as we move forward. In addressing the gaps, we focus on, again, what you have today through a business valuation and what you will need when you retire or exit the business to determine if there are any gaps that we need to close. We then move to preparing the company, preparing the owner, and preparing the family. Let me just talk briefly about what I mean by those three terms. Preparing the company by doing things like helping your management team prepare for a transition, developing employee incentive plans so that your key employees are incentivized to help you build the value of your company if necessary and to stay through an exit if that is part of what makes your company so valuable. And then also business continuity instructions to make sure if the unexpected occurs, your risk is mitigated, and make sure that you have appropriate tax planning completed and buy-sell provisions in place. Preparing the owner by making sure, again, that you have buy-sell provisions in place, that you're adequately insured, that you've tested taking time away from the business, as Laura talked about, if that's something that your business can withstand and that you personally enjoy doing, and make sure that you have a workable financial plan and a current estate plan. Then again, finally, preparing your family. This is focused mostly on family businesses, but making sure that your plans and your process have been adequately communicated to your family. And if you have family values that you want to pass down, that you've identified what those are and how those will continue to be reflected in your business as it moves forward without you. And then finally, making sure that you have processes in place for governing the enterprise in a formal manner. And we also have developed a decision-making matrix that helps you work through that process. At the end of all of this, we have what we call the prepared exit, an action plan for you to move forward and prepare to exit your business. Now I'll turn it back to Josh.
Thank you, Chris. We're almost at the close here, and I'll reiterate, the Business Insights is meant to give you something specific to take away. We know that the process can seem daunting, but our insight that we've learned, that we hope you do as well, is that you can create momentum by starting with 3 questions. So we've got some ideas here to get started. Connect with your banker. They know how to find us, and you may have an established relationship with the banker already to begin having these conversations with. You can see the link to our website here. Embedded in there, you'll find some blog posts, some white papers that we've written together. You'll see a little bit more detail about our planning process. And then there's also a link to the exit planning assessment. Perhaps you want to take action today. This exit planning assessment, it doesn't subscribe you to any specific advisory services, but it allows you to get started. It's a 10 to 15 minute questionnaire that can establish your priorities. And so if you want to do something today, each one of these might be a way for you to get started. The way that we talk about business owner advisory services is that we want to be proactive. We want to provide that guidance specific to business owners. And we recognize that there are lots of competing priorities. And that's what we're here for with the Business Owner Advisory Services Group. You may wonder why we can do this. FNBO has a history of 160 years of family-owned business. And so we have some things that have been learned along the way. But probably most important is our North Star. We are here to improve the financial well-being of our business owners. We think our business owners have positive well-being when they're prepared for the future, when they're protected from the unexpected, and when they prosper with their important relationships. We believe this all happens when you have a transition plan in place. We believe that can get started with 3 questions: when, who, and how much. So we're delighted that you've joined us here for the Business Insights webinar. We hope that you found something that was indeed insightful. Thank you.